Welcome to the Flow Podcast, fearlessly leading our way. This podcast is a space dedicated to spotlighting the unfiltered voices of Black women in their unique leadership journeys. I am your host, Angela V. Harris. I'm an award-winning coach, speaker, author, and champion for Black women. Make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast to stay connected to our conversations. Let's get ready to flow. Hello, fearless leaders, and welcome back to the Flow Podcast, where we explore the journeys of Black women leaders. I am your host, Angela V. Harris. Today's guest is Devoreaux Walton. Devoreaux is the founder and managing partner at Inclusion by Design Company. She is a thought leader, speaker, consultant, and inclusion strategist. Her passion lies at the intersection of belonging, inclusion, technology, and workplace culture, focused on how to amplify inclusion and belonging in both marketing and work environments. Devoreaux is proud to focus on highlighting the voices and experiences of historically marginalized and underrepresented groups to impact representation and equity. She leverages over a decade of experience in marketing, strategy, and human resources when serving clients in the community. A proud Southern Belle, Devoreaux is a Spelman College graduate with a bachelor's degree in psychology, a Washington University in St. Louis graduate with a master's degree in business administration, and 4 certifications in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. When she isn't building brands or elevating corporate cultures, she enjoys attending symphony concerts, playing tennis, and indulging in interior design styling. Welcome to the show, Devoreaux.
Wow, this is incredible. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you, Angela, for having me.
Well, I am so excited to have you. This is definitely a topic that I'm excited to explore and learn more about, and definitely hear your insights.
Awesome. I've got a lot to say and a lot to share.
Good. Well, with that, let's jump right in and get started. Walk us through your journey to becoming a thought leader in the DEI space.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really goes back to, I would say, my childhood, like just being brought up in a family and in a community where everyone around me was underrepresented, right? So I am the daughter of 2 veterans. Both of my parents served in the Army. That's actually where they met. Growing up, I had siblings and other family members who were either, people who were disabled or people who identified within the LGBTQIA community. And, just being an African-American woman myself, I certainly understand the differences in terms of the experience and, how we navigate life being a person who finds themselves underrepresented, especially if you are in multiple categories of being underrepresented. So started out my career in marketing, doing a lot of traditional marketing, a lot of digital marketing. And while I was in the marketing space, I started volunteering as an employee resource group leader. And so a couple of years into the work of volunteering as a co-leader for a ERG, everything happened in 2020 with the murders back to back of, unfortunately, more than one Black American at the hands of police brutality. And that for me was the tipping point. I just could not stand to keep seeing it happening over and over. And so I decided that I wanted to be part of the group who were going to provide solutions and provide support to really help change the world, making it a better place for the next generation and future generations coming behind us. And so I was very intentional. I studied, I had a lot of informational interviews and really learned more about the DEIB space and made that transition to really get up to speed on the fundamentals and become a practitioner. And so now here we are in 2024, and I really have found a way to navigate combining and integrating the marketing expertise, especially around strategy, branding, and promotional campaigns, along with product design and accessibility with the DEIB experience. And so it's a really nice blend of the two, and that's the focus for me right now.
Well, it definitely sounds like you're an expert at intersectionality in your personal and professional worlds.
Absolutely. And I always talk about how this work is very personal for me because of my own lived experience, right? But also the experiences of family members. So the people around me who I have seen their highs and their lows. And this work is not just to check the box. And I get infuriated to no end when a lot of the context around the conversation is let's just check a box. Let's just do
Yeah.
this. It's a federal requirement for the ADA. Let's just do this thing, get it over with. Let's do this bias training, get it over with. But this work is very personal because the impact is very large. And when we
Mhm.
think about the Black tax, and there's so many, taxes for a lot of underrepresented groups, just being able to relieve the burden of being a person who is underrepresented. And so making that change is part of the movement I'm in.
Well, thank you for being an advocate and, like you said, being the change that you wish to see in the world. And that's actually a great segue to the next question I wanted to touch on. I want to talk about the current state of the workplace. You touched on it, but in 2020, we saw so many companies rush to implement DEI commitments and strategies after the murder of George Floyd in particular. And in the past year, we've seen DEI departments and budgets eliminated or slashed. And was it all performative?
This is not a surprise, unfortunately. So when we look at the DEI space from a workplace culture perspective, there is a cycle of the pendulum swinging both ways, with a lot of organizations prioritizing it and a lot of organizations deprioritizing or not emphasizing it. And so what I look for in an organization to really determine their level of commitment is whether or not they stay the course, right? So if an organization has just gotten into the DEIB space in the last 5 years or less, that says a lot to me because organizations who function and they are really navigating the corporate culture space with DEI as a foundational principle, those are the organizations that are going to really stay the course. They're not going to just cancel, minimize, eliminate on a whim. Now, what we're seeing with this political backlash is really, I'm going to be transparent. It is a level of fear by people in the majority.
Mhm.
When I say in the majority, I'm specifically referring to heterosexual, conservative, white males that are trying to stifle the power and the progression for underrepresented groups. Specifically, a lot of what we're seeing in legislation in 2024 and even in 2023 is really targeting race. They're not targeting gender, they're hurting gender, they're hurting groups and people with disabilities, they're hurting other underrepresented groups, but their target is really on race and ethnicity. And it's very clear in a lot of the legislation that we've seen. We look at what's happening with the educational system, and it really is I think these polarizing issues are really great for us as employees and as consumers to know where an organization stands so that we can either choose or not choose to invest our time, energy, or dollars with an organization. So, from a workplace perspective, I really think that a lot of organizations that are disengaging and eliminating DEI, they they really don't see the value and they don't truly understand the level of impact that it has. Now, with the recession, I've seen a lot of organizations downsizing pretty much every department. And there are quite a few organizations that I've seen that have had to reduce their workforce. However, they're not eliminating DEI teams and DEI departments. And so, even though we see some of the loudest voices online or on the news that are in opposition, I do believe that there's a great number of organizations and associations and groups of people who are going to continue to advocate and going to continue to prioritize this really important work.
Okay. So what do you think organizations are doing well when it comes to DEI?
Well, this is a good question. I don't think that in 2024 we're seeing a lot of positive examples, although one of the examples in terms of continuing the commitment, I think that is one thing that organizations are doing well. For the organizations that are fully committed, that have been in the DEIB space within their workplace culture and systems for 20 years plus, 30 years plus, depending on the tenure and the age of the organization, right? And so to see the organizations that are still committed to it is refreshing. I've also even seen some organizations that are continuing to really make an emphasis. And so it's not just something off to the side, it's not optional or a nice to have, but it's really just a top priority. If it's a core value and that's how they're operating, and there are, consequences in place and checks and balances, and there's a level of accountability, I do think that is another positive reflection. The last thing I'll say is that there has been a larger interest in organizations to look at how DEIB can be applied to the organization beyond just culture. And so we're starting to see things like supplier diversity have more importance. And some of the work that I do around inclusive marketing and inclusive design, whether we are designing products, designing workspaces, there's a lot of other ways that DEIB can be embedded and integrated within an organization beyond just the corporate culture. And so we are starting to see a increase in the amount of organizations that are looking beyond just the corporate culture to really make things more inclusive and equitable.
Okay. Well, I heard you mention, I guess, consequences and accountability as it relates to advancing DEI. What exactly does that look like?
Yeah, so I know that a lot of organizations have had sexual harassment training as an annual mandate, similar to cybersecurity and some of the other trainings that most employees have to take, right? And so when there's accountability measures for the DEIB space, it could look like a couple of things. It could look like leaders of organizations being graded or having their performance evaluated, pardon me, having their performance evaluated around representation within their department, within their team. It could
Mm-hmm.
look like someone who is violating corporate policies, depending on an organization's handbook, if they are prioritizing every employee to be treated with respect and dignity because we are all humans, then there can be consequences based on someone violating that, whether it's sexual harassment or something else. And so I think the most important thing from a cultural perspective is that DEIB is not something that's just talked about. It's something that is actively done. And I've seen so many organizations have trainings and have the round table discussions, which is great to continue the conversations. The conversation should never end. However, there is a great opportunity for us to take more action and have more things like accountability measures in place, because that's where we see the actual implementation come to life.
Okay, that's good to know. And I'm curious. I was looking at like a random company's diversity report, and I found an interesting statistic. They said that in one of the required trainings that they had, they only reached 88% completion at the leadership level. So, what does something like that indicate if the leaders aren't completing the required trainings?
Yeah, this is a broader topic because I have a lot of really strong thoughts and perspectives around required training. When we require training, we are force feeding the people who are going to do it and they don't care and they're not committed are just going to say, let me just get this done and check the box. The
Hmm.
other people who will rebel against it will just throw their hands up and opt out completely. So required training is very sticky subject. I know some practitioners believe that it's a good rule of thumb. It's not something I recommend. My recommendation for organizations and when we look at this perspective of the 88% is really thinking about having conversations at the top. Because for me, my perspective is all about the actions that are being taken, right? And so having everyone aligned on that executive team, that leadership team, that this is important, they agree and they commit to it. And what that means is they are doing one of five things every quarter or every year or whatever those measurements are. That's how we look to see whether or not impact is actually being made. Another measure I think that's really important to look at is engagement surveys. Some organizations, most organizations that have an engagement survey, that data is anonymous. And so an employee is free to speak their mind about giving feedback and giving that candid perspective about their employee experience. Now, in terms of the 88%, that really shows us that there's a group within the leadership, the people leaders, the executives that they don't quite understand or they don't quite value the DEI work being done for them to not even engage in the training.
Hmm.
I believe that every people leader should not be required, but should desire to learn about ways to engage with their employees and with their teams in order to honor their humanity. And that could be in a lot of different flavors. Maybe it's DEI, maybe it's emotional intelligence, maybe it's cultural intelligence. There's a lot of different ways that people leaders can continue to develop their leadership and people skills in order to really foster authentic connections and motivate and inspire their teams. That's the difference between being a manager, a supervisor, and being a leader. Being a leader is someone who is committed to inspiring, really being able to support and bring out the best in their teams.
That's great perspective. And I like what you said about the conversation starting at the top and emphasizing that it's really not a one size fits all approach and that the leaders should be given options and the choice to choose what resonates with them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that if there's an understanding within a leadership team that, okay, this is important, okay, this is how I'm going to be, my performance is going to be reviewed and how I'm going to really be able to have an effective outcome at the end of the year. That's why these checks and balances are important. The same way that we have business revenue targets, every sales team has a target. You cannot show me one high performing sales team that does not have a target monthly, quarterly, some even have them weekly and daily. And so if we're monitoring and we're measuring business results, DEIB is just as important because it directly ties to business results. The
Right.
benefits have been well documented from Harvard, Forbes, the list goes on and on. I mean, I think that we need to move beyond having the conversation of making the business case to just making the commitment to the actions that we will take.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And talking about the benefits from the research that I've seen, benefits of diversity include increased productivity, profitability, innovation, and brand recognition, which are all good things for companies.
Absolutely. I mean, it's no secret that when an employee is respected and valued, they're going to be happier. That means they're more focused on their work. That means they are giving more of themselves to do a higher quality of work. They're going to be more loyal. They're going to stay at an organization longer. And we don't need to go through the recruiting statistics, but it is much more expensive to go out and find a new employee than to
Yes.
just retain a good one. Not
Yes,
to
it is.
mention from the marketing side that consumers care about how they are being reflected. And so when they see an ad, when they see a campaign and it's disrespectful, it's missing the mark, they are going to use their dollars to either support or go find another brand that's going to align with the respectful representation of who they are in their communities.
That makes sense. Can you share a success story or memorable experience from your work that highlights the impact of prioritizing inclusion and belonging?
Absolutely. So I was working with a nonprofit organization, excuse me, and they had just hired a new HR leader. And this HR leader really wanted to take the organizational culture to the next level. And so what we did was a series of team building workshops, highly interactive for people to get to know each other. And instead of teaching principles around DEI, we were able to use those principles during the workshop. So one example is psychological safety. Instead of giving definitions and PowerPoint slides and worksheets and quizzes and homework around what it was, we fostered psychological safety. And so it was a great hands-on learning for organizations to really get to know what it looks like when it shows up and it's real life and not just a script or a PowerPoint slide. And so through the series of workshops, we were able to get some feedback and do touch points at the 6-month post survey point and the 12-month post survey point. And it was really incredible to see the data around the employees that were engaged, that felt more committed to not only their specific job, but the organization. And it was just really powerful. And this just confirms the research that has already been documented about why it matters. And it's this impact, right? I mean, if we can really just take this as a people leadership skill set and we don't consider it as a nice to have to avoid legal legal problems, I think the perspective and the framing of it is what's most important because DEIB is a skill set from a workplace culture perspective that really is a leadership skill. And so we saw the HR leader at this nonprofit just have such fantastic results and was sharing with other nonprofit organizations as well. You know, I think the important thing about this is that when we look at from a workplace culture perspective, it has to be something that is prioritized by the group at the top. Whether the group is one person, 10 people, everyone has to be on board because if there are other people essentially rowing against the current, then different teams and different employees are having different experiences and there's a disalignment. And so that's one of the key things about organizations that are really getting it right, because when everyone is on the same accord and they understand that this DEIB thing is how we show up, it's not just a one-off or an annual training, then things are much more different. And it's a much more positive workplace culture for everyone there.
Yeah, I hear what you said. Alignment is crucial, and it really resonates with me because I can think back to organizations where I've worked, and if you go to the company website, there are statements that say one thing, but I often felt like those statements didn't reflect my lived experience working for managers within those organizations. So, like you said, everyone should really be in alignment. There shouldn't be two separate messages.
And unfortunately, Angela, that's the reality for a lot of organizations. Even the organizations that were doing the performative work in 2020 and 2021, Everyone had website paragraphs and social media posts that said one thing, but the day to day was very different.
Hmm.
And so if people can, like-minded leaders can come together and decide how best to show up, that really does help to make a workplace a much better experience. Because I can tell you the research around underrepresented people being unhappy, they may stay in an organization to get a check until they can find their next organization. But
Hmm.
trust and believe that thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are not happy working where they are probably actively looking to go somewhere else.
Yep. Yep. I'm curious. We've seen so many, mass layoffs within the last year or two, and we know that underrepresented individuals are impacted at higher rates with those mass layoffs. How is that going to impact some of the DEI initiatives that companies have put in place in terms of increasing representation?
Yeah, so this goes back to a lot of organizations that really have either deprioritized or eliminated and just thrown DEI out the window. Unfortunately, we've seen quite a few organizations to recalibrate their priorities. And so in 2021, the conversation was increased representation, we're committed, and we care about it because the sun is shining. And now in 2023 and 2024, we are seeing organizations, specifically corporate organizations, that have no tie or communication or, excuse me, connection was the word I'm looking for, to the education system, to say, well, we're just going to opt out or we're going to reprioritize. And so what's happening is that when we look at the representation numbers, especially at the end of this year, or even just at the end of the first half, if we looked at those numbers in July, I think we would see larger disparities than what we had in 2020 and 2021. Now, from a lot of practitioners who have been in this space for, multiple decades, they are really forecasting that things are going to shift back at some point. It could be 1 year, it could be the next 5 years or less. And then organizations will again be scrambling for underrepresented talent and trying to reprioritize DEIB. Now, what's interesting about the scope of work that I do, Angela, is that when we look at underrepresented groups, that goes beyond race and gender. I know a lot of people tend to think diversity only means gender or race and ethnicity. So a lot of the work that I'm doing specifically in the inclusive consumer space and inclusive marketing space is around Gen Z. Now, I'll tell you, Angela, the data is very interesting. Gen Zers are going to be entering the workforce, and soon they will be the majority. Gen Zers care about DEIB, and it's not just what's on a website. They are looking to see what companies are doing, what actions are being taken, what are the commitments, what is the tangible result and evidence that shows what they're doing in the space. And so these conversations around deprioritize, eliminate representation targets, all of these types of conversations are not going to help organizations when they're trying to recruit that Gen Z talent, because their
Mhm.
priorities are very different from what millennials and Gen Xers have established.
Right. And essentially, failure to address this, we won't have a pipeline of future leaders.
Absolutely. There's going to be a large talent gap. And so organizations have to be thinking about this. And it's not only from the perspective of talent in the workplace, they have to be thinking about it when they're looking at how they're going to market. What's that marketing strategy? And so really being able to do both and handle both sides of the same coin, it's very interesting because a lot of brands are not taking advantage of the opportunity to think about what's next, what's on the horizon. Gen Z is coming, and the demographic, as the years go on, they will get older. They will have even more buying power. They will have even more of the percentage of the workforce. And so we need to be thinking about these things. And, the true visionary leaders are not just looking at 2024, they're looking at the future. And so those are the organizations that I think are going to get it right. If they care, they're looking and they're putting plans in place and strategies to make sure that representation and a lot of these other elements around whether it's culture or their marketing is really dialed in to make sure that it's inclusive, because it does matter and it will affect their bottom line.
I want to go back to what you said about the most likely shift in the numbers is due to the layoffs that we've seen. So can we really trust the numbers that we see in the annual DEI reports? Are companies just using selective language to help them meet their numbers? Because I feel like I've never really seen a company say like, oh, we've lost, I don't know, 5% of our underrepresented talent workforce. We always see the happy case scenario reported.
Yeah, so DEI reports are, what's the word to say? They are I think it's relative. We think about the context of them. Having worked with organizations on the DEI report content, I've seen, the back end of the process, and it is a very interesting perspective in terms of what's prioritized, right? Because when a report is made public, it's going to shareholders, it's going to the general public, and a lot of organizations, even if they're willing to be transparent, don't necessarily want to call out the good, the bad, the ugly, specifically the ugly. And
Mm-hmm.
so really being very intentional about their positioning, intentional about the information and the data that is being shared. I think the unfortunate thing is that I have not seen any reports that call out specifically the impact of the layoffs and as it relates to underrepresented groups. I've never seen it. I've seen the representation data, yet when we look at, if an organization is prioritizing a new department or a new initiative and they're, hiring some talent, the data that we're looking at big picture is not necessarily the specific point around who has left. We're looking at end of
Mm-hmm.
the year, whatever time they took that snapshot. This is the total current population, and I'm using air quotes because we know those numbers can be, whatever they decide to share. I think that organizations that are innovative and the ones that are the leaders in the space of really being able to do things before they're popular, I think they will be more inclined to give more information and more data. But I'm not sure that what we would ever see an organization to report on the impact of layoffs, because it's not going to tell a very good story that's going to put them in a positive light.
Right. And what you said kind of reminded me, I want to read this. It's an old tweet, but it came out in 2022 by Dr. Monica Cox. And in the tweet, she says, instead of showing me your diversity statement, show me your hiring data, your discrimination claim stats, your salary tables, your retention numbers, your diversity policies, and your leaders' public actions against racism.
That should be on a billboard. And
Like you said,
also,
those are the numbers we'll never see because it probably won't paint them in a positive light.
yeah,
But I feel
what
like that's where like the meat is. Like those are the issues that I feel we should be addressing. We just had equal pay day for women a couple of days ago, and the pay gap is going to be in place for at least the next 100 years.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that job seekers who are smart are asking these kinds of questions in interviews, especially if you are interviewing for a leadership role, to really know what you're getting into with a particular organization before you show up on day one. But the reality is, a lot of this information is not going to be shared based on that list you just read off. And I love that tweet because these are the challenges that organizations are up against. And even the best in class organizations that are doing well in the DEIB space as it relates to workplace culture, even they are going to get some things wrong, or they're going to miss the mark on some things. But being able to admit that and willingly share the information
Right.
goes
Yeah.
beyond just glossing over our goals and our targets. I don't
Right.
care about your target. I want to see the results of what has been done.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point because I feel like as it relates to these targets, I feel like the targets keep moving. Like we've been having, so my background's in the tech industry. We've been talking about increasing the representation of women in tech for years, and I feel like a company will make a commitment or a target, they'll miss the target, miss the date, and it's like reset it to a new target. But like you said, there's no accountability or no saying we missed our target.
And see, this is the disconnect between sales, business revenue, and these other targets. They are being measured, they are being improved, they have a microscope on top of them. And when it comes to these other targets, specifically around the DEIB space, we don't have that same level of rigor, that same level of commitment, and really the perspective that we're going to make this important. And so we are going to, in fact, measure it more than once a year for a report. That's the opportunity. So,
Hmm.
despite what's going on with the backlash and the anti DEI movement, we still need this space. This space is not going to go away in the workplace. In fact, I think that this polarizing issue is a great one for job seekers and again for consumers, because we know based on what is being said or not being said where
Hmm.
an organization stands.
Absolutely. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit. I came across an interesting fun fact about you, Devereaux, and I learned that you were a judge for the Miss Texas pageant.
I was a judge for the preliminary competition back in 2019. Yes. I go back to my childhood with pageantry. So I was formerly a contestant in about 3 to 5 different competitions over the course of my life, and also have been on the side of coaching briefly back in about 2015, 2016, and also a pageant judge. So pageantry, I love it.
Well, I'm competing in the Miss Corporate America competition in June of 2024. What tips can you share with me from a judge's perspective?
Absolutely. Well, let me just spin a question towards you just real quick, Angela. What is your favorite part of a pageant competition?
Well, this is my first time, so honestly, it's a
Okay.
completely new experience for me. So I'm just going in eyes wide open.
Okay, absolutely. So for me, as a former contestant, my favorite part of the competition was question and answer. I absolutely loved answering questions on stage, and that was always something that I really enjoyed not only preparing for, but also, performing during the actual competition. So, the main tips I would give to you are definitely just be confident in who you are, because the confidence shows in your presence on stage. When you step out onto the stage, when you are moving across the stage, people will pick up on that. So just be confident in who you are, and just know that you have, taken the leap to get into this competition, and you're going to show up and just be your best and do your best. The other tip I would share is to really be authentic. So thinking about the outfits you're going to wear, and as you are preparing for your interviews and your on stage questions, be authentic in what you're sharing, because the women who share authentically, those are typically the ones who are most comfortable and will show up and really just own who they are, and enjoy sharing who they are with others. So I've seen some contestants who try to say what is right or tell people what they think they want to hear, but if it's not authentic, then you're not being true to yourself. So I would share that as well. And then the last thing is to just have fun. It's going to be a great experience. You're going to meet so many other people, and You're going to be in Florida, which is a super fun place to get some sun. So yeah, definitely just have a good time. And at the end of the day, just enjoy yourself and enjoy the experience. The time will probably go by fast. And so you really want to be able to savor and enjoy it as much as possible.
Well, thank you for that advice. I appreciate it. And I'll definitely keep you posted.
It's going to be so exciting. And June's right around the corner, too.
Yes. Well, before we wrap up, I do have one final question for you. What do you do to recharge when you aren't fearlessly leading?
Ooh, I love this question. So I like to jokingly say that my two hobbies, one is self-care, the other is handbags. And it's actually true. Like I indulge in self-care, whether it's getting a massage, manicure, pedicure. I have recently enjoyed sound baths. And so
Oh, yes.
that
Yes,
for
I
this
enjoy
year,
sound baths as well. Yes.
yeah, this year I've really been getting into sound baths. I love meditation. I love just taking a moment. And so self-care could be a lot of things. Because I do also love handbags, it could be looking at handbags online, going to a boutique and just checking them out. It could be shopping, actually buying a handbag. It could be enjoying a cup of tea, getting some fresh air, going for a walk. I really find that we all have the power and the control to define what self-care means to us. And so self-care is something that I do make time for each and every day, even if it's not hours and I can only do, a half an hour or 10 minutes. It is something that I do make the time for because it's so important.
Yes. Well, I love that. I love that you have such a variety of activities that you incorporate into your self-care plan.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's trial and error. So, I really got to the point that I was burnt out. This was back in 2018, 2019. I was just so burnt out from work and other time commitments, and I really had to learn how to make the time, make a plan. And for a while, I just had a running list of things that I enjoyed, to engage in for self-care. And it was just like, okay, when I got discouraged or I just needed a moment, I would look at the list and say, okay, well, I'm going to pick that. I'm going to light an aromatherapy candle, and that's going to be, the one I do. And so, yeah, it's really about having intention. And I would say that really comes around full circle to the theme of the topic, DEIB,
Hmm.
having an intention, having an intention for your self-care. Being intentional about something means that you prioritize it, and it means that you actually follow through. We can think about things all day. We can think about self-care. We can think about fostering an inclusive culture. We can think about having an inclusive ad campaign, but what are we actually doing? And that's where we need to make the connection happen.
Right. And as the name of your company, Inclusion by Design.
There you go. It was not an accident. The name was very intentional
I'm
in
sure
that.
it was. Well, Deborah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. How can our listeners stay connected with you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was such a treat. I was looking forward to it all week. So the best way to find me is at my website, Inclusion by Design Co. You can also find us on our LinkedIn page. The company name is Inclusion by Design Co. We have a podcast coming soon, and that information will also be on the website. And if you're interested, you can also find me on LinkedIn, Devoreaux Walton. You'll probably want to copy paste because the first name is French. It's 9 letters, and a lot of people, always tease me about my French spelling.
Well, I will make sure I include all of your contact information in the show notes.
Perfect.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review and share it with someone. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Flow Podcast. As we wrap up today's episode, always remember your unique path, your voice, and your leadership matter. If you loved what you heard, Subscribe now to stay updated on our latest episodes. Take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who can benefit from these conversations. You can stay connected with me on Instagram at The Flow Podcast with Angela, or visit me on the web at angelavharris.com. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and keep fearlessly leading in your own way.